Malcolm Jolley for MJ Winebox with Magdalena Kaiser, my friend and the author of the new Niagara Food and Drink book. It's a cookbook, but it's a lot more than a cookbook, and I want to talk about that. But in case people don't know who you are, Magda, can you explain why you are the perfect person to write the book about Niagara?
Well, I hope I'm a pretty good person. I don't know about the perfect, but yes, I feel so. I am Magdalena Kaiser, and I grew up in Niagara, Niagara on the Lake specifically. Uh, and my father co-founded Inniskillen Wines in the 1970s. So I have a long history of really understanding the wine and the food culture that really kind of grew in Niagara from the early 70s. So I've been watching this from a very early age. I actually helped my father bottle wine when I was 5 years old. He was an Austrian immigrant and actually had been looking for grapevines to put just in his backyard and then looking for uh, vines to eventually get grapes to make wine. So that whole thing is a different story, how he and his partner founded Inniskillen. But I worked at the winery when I was very young in my teens, really just helping the winery from an early age, uh, educating people, actually helping doing tours, and really being part of the evolution of a culture in Ontario and then ultimately Canada. So that was happening, but I think what also is a big important part of my life is that uh, being from a family of Austrian immigrants, and I was born in Austria but moved when I was two. My grandmother was a great cook and a great baker, and we really always believed that wine and food were, integral. And we always had family suppers every weekend and every night actually ate as a family. And so, with my father being a winemaker, wine was always on the table and it was always part of the conversation, just a natural part of the conversation. And I loved cooking. My grandmother, we fondly call her Oka. There's a dedication in my book to her and my father. She just inspired cooking and bringing people together. And I just always felt that was really important. And so I grew up that way. And then eventually, through my life, I came back in almost 15 years ago, having lived in the US for 10 years. And I started working in the Culinary Tourism Alliance and in the Ontario Wines of Ontario industry. And so the work that I did there for the last 15 years made me very connected again to actually all the 195 wineries in Ontario. And I've become very close to the producers, the winemakers. I understand their stories, and I really understand the wines. And alongside that, I really do love to celebrate what the chefs are doing locally and how that's grown together. And living, of course, in Niagara on the Lake, Niagara is really the fruit. It was always known as the fruit belt, the tender fruit belt of Canada. And so I grew up with, being able to walk around and see wild asparagus and fiddleheads and wild mushrooms and just really understand. And of course, the fruit trees, apricots, peaches, pears, plums,
Mhm.
all the things. So all those things, I guess for me, I'm answering it in a long way, but that's who I am. That's my background. And so that's the lead in, I guess, for where I ended up writing this book because I feel that it was an important book to write for the region. And I can tell you a little bit more about the book, but
Yeah, well, let's talk about the book because that was kind of a line of questioning that I thought of like is this a wine book disguised as a cookbook or a cookbook disguised as a wine book? There's really a lot going on. So tell me about what you wanted to produce and what you have.
yeah, so I think it's both those things, as you said. I think that it will appeal to audiences that are very much wine-focused people. Excuse me. So the book itself has 44 of the Niagara wineries, and there's over 100 wineries in Niagara. So it's sometimes tricky to select, but I believe the wineries in this book really build a great story for the region. They show diversity in what we produce, and I think also the different styles of wineries, larger wineries, smaller wineries, people from different backgrounds. So there's 44 wineries, and for each winery, I worked with them to really select two wines that I wanted to feature that were essentially icon wines of their property. And again, kind of rounding out the story of Niagara to highlight key styles and varieties that we do really well, varietals. And uh, and so that's the premise of the book. And so after the wines were selected, I asked them to provide me recipes that I would then vet and understand how we could put this together in a pairing situation within the book and provide recipes. So, so each winery, for instance, has a profile that I wrote to provide insight of about 400 words, just really an insight on, who the winery is, where they came from, what they stand for, if there's a particular style. And so that's in the book. And then alongside are each of the wines from their property goes with a recipe. And so some of the recipes, many of the wineries in Niagara have actual restaurants on site. For instance, Trius, very well known now, Michelin recommended restaurant. And so Frank Dodd, their chef Frank Dodd, provided two recipes, and the chefs proposed their recipes, and then again, I needed to make sure that they actually paired with the wines. And so there was a preliminary kind of vetting that I did. And then in each case, I tasted every dish and pairing. And oftentimes going in and making the food with the chef, watching and then tasting everything, making my pairing notes for the book. And in many cases, also then making the recipes separately from that. And then lastly, when we did the photography for the book, uh, all of those recipes, well, half the recipes were then remade again. So then tasting that again. So there was a lot of tasting and cooking involved, which was wonderful. And going back to the chefs, so many of them were chefs from the wineries, but some of the properties don't have restaurants. And so they partnered with a restaurant. So for instance, Stratus Winery partnered with their uh, um, partnership. They have a partnership with Loop Line in Toronto. So the chef from there provided a recipe. Other people would have gone to um, York Vineyards, partnered with Tide and Vine, which is a local seafood restaurant. So again, it was really nice because then there was an integration of additional chefs from restaurants, which are very important partners for the wineries and the region. And then lastly, there were some people that wanted to provide personal recipes, which of course was wonderful. And I'll tell you a little bit of a funny story, and you know this person. So Thomas Batchelder, who of course is a very amazing, dynamic, energetic winemaker, one of Canada's best. And he's also a great friend, but he provided two recipes for his own Batchelder wines. And then he also provided two recipes for Domaine Le Clos Jardin, which he does consulting winemaking for. So
Right.
four personal recipes from Thomas, and he was a very detailed, intense person in the sense of making sure we explore every flavor alive. So the session I did with him was at their home in Fonthill, and we did, I think it was about 8 to 9 hours. We cooked
God.
four recipes and tasting a lot of those wines to go along to see which Chardonnay out of his 12 Chardonnays was going to go with particular recipe. So that was one of the, I would say, marathon tastings, and which was wonderful. But again, all of these things really built a beautiful, fabric for the book because there's different elements in the way people provided recipes. And so lastly, so then again, we're talking about the cooking, and then of course there's the wine component for people that love wine. And then at the beginning of the book, because of the work that I've been doing for the last 15 years on behalf of the Ontario wine industry, I have a lot of knowledge on the informational, educational side that I think is really important for people to know in any wine region. So a sommelier could pick up this book and read the front section. I have the most current maps, which I enhanced and made them in a way that I think communicates easily and well. So they're references, but then so they're super detailed, but the front section is not so big that anyone could pick up this book. Someone visiting from New York or LA or Vancouver, maybe who doesn't know Niagara so well, or Europe, can come here as a tourist and pick this book up and really understand the Niagara region. So I believe that I've pulled together kind of a wine book, education, tourism cookbook that is a bit unique in that way.
I think it's really smart, and I love it f for all those reasons. If you were a student, studying the wines of Ontario or Niagara in particular, it's an amazing resource. If you're a wine nerd like me and love maps, it's got maps and all kinds of cool information. And then it's a really cool cookbook, and it's also like a tourist guide. Like it's got everything. And the one thing that I picked up on when you're talking about the book is I realized, of course, it's not just that you have to test all the recipes to make sure they work, but they have to work with the wine.
Yes.
Did you have to kind of, were there 12 roast chickens and 12 Chardonnays, so you had to say, okay, we need to mix it up, or did people generally give you different recipes that worked?
Well, there's two things there. One, there was only, in the end, after I did my pre-selection, there was only one recipe that didn't work. And it was provided by a restaurant with a wine pairing. And I won't mention the winery because we did the tasting and the food was amazing and the wine was amazing separately. But it was really, truly an example of when you put them together, they didn't elevate the experience. They actually made shut the wine down and didn't celebrate the flavors from the dish. So we after the chef actually worked at tweaking the recipe 3 or 4 times, I just said finally, I think that we need to revisit a different recipe. That only actually happened once, which is great because out of 88 recipes, that would have been tricky if we kept having to go back.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is when I went out, first I selected all the wines. So again, we had a good selection of Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, Cabernet Franc, some Sauvignon Blanc, some sparkling wine, and orange wine from Southbrook, which I think it's important to tell that story, and they're known for, and and ice wine. And so we had all these wines, and then of course I put it out to all of the chefs and said, "Oh, please start proposing your dishes." So what's interesting is because we have classic, varieties that do well here in Ontario, so Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. So I think I must have received 6 duck recipes because
Right.
we Pinot Noir is a classic duck pairing.
Yeah.
So while we do eat duck and I love duck and we don't see duck every day on the menu and we're not cooking duck all the time. So I put 1 duck recipe in here. So I basically, and the second one, the most popular recipe that came in was short ribs. So I probably had about 7, but the thing is, as I was waiting for people to respond, I kind of had to give it to the first person that responded.
Okay.
So, and all of the chefs and people were great, but there are a few people that I thought, oh, it would be really nice to get their short rib recipe or whatever it is because they're known for it, but they came in too late. So, I had to say, sorry, you're going to have to do something else. And which was fine because they came up. So I really balanced the book so that there's food in there for meat lovers, different kinds of meat, that we celebrate in Niagara and Ontario, and then seafood. I really, pasta and seafood and vegetables. There are a few vegetarian dishes, one that can be kind of made into a vegan dish that one of the winemakers eats that way and loves that. So they provided their recipes, which are lovely. And then uh, and from the seafood side, again, this is a celebration of Niagara, but I didn't want to be so specific that I think we could I wanted to include Canadian ingredients. So the seafood, there are fish dishes, which of course we have in Lake Ontario right near Niagara, but we do have scallops and oysters and shrimp from the East Coast. And I think, for me, I think that really rounds out the book because it's still Canadian, and it's an interpretation of how we bring those foods to our region in Niagara and put the wines that are very food friendly and can, be with those dishes. So that is really, it is a Niagara celebration, but flexibility a little bit with more Canadian ingredients.
Well, it's great. I think you can enjoy it wherever you are in Canada and around the world.
Mhm.
Magda, thank you so much for telling me about your amazing book.
Thank you, Malcolm, for having me. I can't wait to, yeah, try a recipe with you sometime soon and a wine.